I married a homeless man I found on the street, and a month later I didn't recognize him in my own home. My name is Casey Warren, 28 years old, Columbus, Ohio, night shift dispatcher at a freight company, and families like ours don't get fairy tales. What I didn't know that night was the most important moment of my life would happen outside a diner at 2 in the morning. I saw him sitting on the cold pavement, back perfectly straight, not slumped, not begging, just still. The man nobody looked at twice, I looked 3 times. I bought 2 coffees and walked back, set one beside him without explanation. He looked up and said quietly, "You didn't have to do that." I said, "I know." One conversation that changed my whole life started with exactly those 4 words. We sat in silence after that, and when I finally walked to my car, I realized I hadn't asked his name, but I already knew something. Whatever brought that man to that pavement had not finished him. And that thought followed me all the way home. His name was Marcus Holloway, 33 years old, and he had been living outside for 8 months. He told me that on our 3rd conversation, standing in the same spot, same diner, different night. I'd gone back. I didn't plan to, I just did. My closest friend, Jenny Marsh, 30 years old, nonprofit worker, the most grounded person I know, told me I was being naive. "Casey, you don't know anything about him," she said, and for one honest moment, I wondered if she was right. But the part that stopped me cold was, I knew more about Marcus in 3 conversations than I'd known about most people in 3 years. He didn't ask me for anything, ever. He talked about architecture, about how cities are designed to move certain people through and push others out. Before anyone else believed in him, I already understood that this man had simply fallen through a crack the world pretended didn't exist. He was rebuilding, quietly, alone. She said I'd regret it. I said nothing. That was my answer. 6 months later, we were married in a courthouse with Jenny as our witness. Simple, private, ours. What I didn't know was that someone was already planning to take it apart. Diane Holloway, 57 years old, Marcus's mother, found out about our marriage through a cousin at a family gathering we hadn't even attended. She called Marcus that same evening. I heard his side of the conversation from the kitchen, short answers, long silences, the kind of call where one person is talking and the other is just surviving it. 2 weeks later, she invited us to dinner. Big house, nice neighborhood, a table set for 8 people I didn't know. I wore my best dress, I smiled, I was polite. And somewhere between the salad and the main course, Diane looked directly at me and said pleasantly, in front of everyone, "Marcus always did have a big heart. I just hoped one day he'd learn the difference between helping someone and marrying them." I didn't react. And that scared her more than anything. The table went very quiet, someone coughed, a fork was set down carefully. I picked up my water glass and took a slow sip. Later that night I thought about her face when she said it, not cruel exactly. Scared, like a woman terrified of losing something she couldn't even name, treated like I didn't belong, in a room full of people who heard everything. But I stored every word, the whole room did. After that dinner, the pressure didn't arrive loudly. That's the thing about quiet manipulation, it doesn't announce itself. It arrives as a phone call to Marcus that lasts 40 minutes. It arrives as a text from Sandra, 43 years old, Marcus's older sister, sharp and image-conscious, who messaged me directly one Tuesday afternoon. "I think you're a good person, Casey. I just wonder if you two really thought this through." Sweet enough to seem caring, pointed enough to land exactly where it was meant to. What she never counted on was how quietly I pay attention. I saved that message. I saved every message. Then one evening Marcus came home and said something I didn't expect. "I told my mother we're not discussing this anymore." Just like that, no drama, no argument. He had drawn a line I didn't even know he was ready to draw. I watched Sandra choose her side slowly, the way people do when they're convincing themselves they're being reasonable. I watched Deanne work the family like someone tending a garden, patient, methodical, but after that evening something had shifted. Deanne wasn't just rejecting me anymore, she was building something harder, a case, a narrative. And she was getting very close to making her move. Marcus started coming home quieter. Not distant, just carrying something heavy he wasn't ready to put down yet. I recognized that weight. I'd carried versions of it my whole life. Mom used to say, dignity doesn't need an audience. She was 54 when she passed, 2 years before I ever met Marcus, and I thought about her constantly during those weeks. One night I sat in our kitchen alone at midnight and I cried, not because I was losing, but because I was tired of having to be so careful all the time, tired of measuring every word, tired of being the calm one. But there was one thing I hadn't told anyone yet. Marcus had been keeping a record, not because he anticipated any of this, because his counselor during his hardest months had told him to document his rebuilding, every milestone. Every date, every letter of support. He had a folder, thick, organized, time-stamped. The kind of woman who prepares before she responds, that's what I was trying to be, and I had already read every page. I already knew exactly who my husband was. If any of this feels familiar, if you've ever loved someone the world wrote off, stay with me, because the turn is coming. The letter arrived on a Thursday, handwritten, no stamp. Someone had driven here and placed it by hand. I knew before I even opened it. I stood at the kitchen counter and read it slowly. She wrote about legacy, about expectations. Then I reached the last line, and everything got very clear. She was a kindness project, not a life partner. You know the difference, Marcus, you always have. I set it down, picked it up, read it again. My hands went completely still, not because I was afraid. Because something inside me just quietly finished deciding. I photographed every word, placed it back exactly where I found it. Then 40 minutes later, Diane called me directly. Not Marcus, me. Her voice was almost warm. Casey, I hope you received my note. I meant it with love. She was daring me, out in the open. Karma arrived quietly that afternoon because words written down become something the writer never once imagined. Evidence, permanent, dated. Undeniable. I didn't tell her I had already photographed every single word. I just said, I did receive it, Diane. Thank you for putting it in writing. Then I hung up, and then I sat down. And I started making a plan she would never see coming. I showed Marcus the letter that evening and the phone call, both. I didn't hand it dramatically. I just set my phone on the table and said, she came by. He read the letter once. Then again, then he put it down and walked to the window and stood there for a long time without speaking. That's the moment I understood what we were actually dealing with, because when he finally turned around, his eyes were wet, not crying. Just full, he said. I spent 14 months proving I was worth something, and she still, he stopped. Didn't finish, didn't need to. Then he went to the bedroom and came back with his folder, his rebuilding record. He placed it on the table next to her letter. 14 months of documentation. Counselor notes, employment records, reference letters, bank statements showing the slow, honest rebuild. He wasn't who she told everyone he was. He never had been. I set my hand flat on top of that folder and looked at my husband, and something settled between us that night. Solid, quiet, like a foundation that has been tested and held. He said she's going to make her move soon. I said, I know, let her. We were already ready. Jenny had been quiet through most of this, which, if you know Jenny, means she'd been working. She called me on a Sunday morning. But not with good news, not yet. Casey, the organization that worked with Marcus, they won't release records without his written consent. Privacy rules. My stomach dropped, one document standing between us and everything. Marcus signed the consent form that same afternoon. We drove it there ourselves, handed it in person. 3 days later, Jenny called again. This time her voice was different. I pulled the file. Attendance logs, case notes, progress markers. A formal written assessment describing Marcus as one of the most disciplined individuals they had ever worked with. He had been building something she never thought to look for, a paper trail of his own character, in systems Diane never knew existed. And then Coach Ray Daniels, 65 years old, retired director of the Downtown Community Resource Center, called Marcus that same week. Said he still had his center records, every person, every date, every note. A folder he had never thrown away. She thought she had everyone counted. She miscounted. Diane had a narrative. We had evidence, and evidence doesn't need to raise its voice. Diane called a family gathering 2 weeks later. Sunday lunch at her house. She framed it as reconciliation, her word in the group message. Marcus and I went. Jenny stayed in the car outside. Coach Ray drove himself and arrived 5 minutes after us, unannounced. The folder landed on that table and the room stopped. Coach Ray set it down quietly, the way someone sets down something they've carried a long time. He said simply, I've known Marcus 2 years. I kept records because that's what I do. I thought today was a good day to share them. One of Diane's cousins, a man I didn't know, said immediately, what is this, some kind of ambush? Nobody answered him, because the folder was already open. Sandra pushed her chair back slowly. Diane's coffee cup stopped halfway to her mouth. The cousin looked around for backup and found none. That one interruption made everything more real, more human, more undeniable. Because if it had gone perfectly smoothly, you could dismiss it, but it didn't go smoothly. It went honestly. And when honest things land in a room full of people who have been told a story, you can see the exact moment they start questioning everything. One by one, they looked at Marcus, then at me. None of it ended the way she planned. Every bit of it ended the way we did. 3 days after that Sunday, Diane came to our door. Alone, no phone call, no warning. I opened it and we stood there looking at each other for a long moment. She didn't come in. She just said, I wanted to see where he lives. That was all. She looked past me into our apartment, our small, honest, real home, and something moved across her face that I had never seen before. Not an apology, not yet, but the beginning of one. Sandra called Marcus that same week, quiet, genuine, sorry in the way that counts. I used to think loving someone the world had written off meant proving yourself loudly to everyone watching. Now I know what patience looks like when it finally speaks is not a speech. It's a folder on a table and a room that goes quiet, and sometimes it's 4 words on cold pavement at 2 a.m. You didn't have to. I know. If this moved you, subscribe, give this a like, and drop your city in the comments. People just like us are holding themselves together all across this country. She tried to write our ending. We already had one. She called him a kindness project. He called me his wife. That was always going to be enough.